And you. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex. Join me with Aria in the latest deep dive by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments.
And the headline for today, January 1st, 2026, is, it's a stark one, Putin risks Russians' lives for ego-shocking footage.
It is. It's a deliberately provocative headline, but when you really look beneath the official narrative, what our sources are revealing is a dangerous and rapidly deteriorating situation inside Russia.
The cracks are definitely getting wider. You can see them.
Absolutely. So today we are going to deep dive right into those internal cracks. We're going to cover how the cost of Vladimir Putin's ego and his absolute rule is being measured not just in rubles, but in the radicalization of the very people he has always relied on.
His soldiers' wives.
Exactly. We're going to look at the true domestic cost of this conflict, some really startling new data on Russian public opinion, and, the personality traits that seem to define the leader at the center of it all.
And if we had to give you a shortcut to understanding this whole situation, it's this. The war is eating the Russian economy from the inside out.
Right, and that's creating a level of social pressure that the Kremlin just hasn't effectively dealt with since this all began.
We have a pretty big stack of sources today. There's a detailed analysis of Russian social media, specifically VK, reports on the surging military personnel costs.
Economic assessments showing how unsustainable it all is, and of course the reporting on this growing public dissent led by military families. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's start with the money, because the numbers are, they're astronomical. Independent estimates show Russia's spending on military personnel has just skyrocketed.
How high are we talking?
A record 2 trillion rubles in the first half of 2025 alone.
2 trillion rubles. That's roughly, 26 billion US dollars.
In just 6 months. And it's only on personnel.
That figure alone just raises so many questions. I mean, why is it so high? Is this purely battlefield attrition, or is there something else going on?
It's driven by desperation, really. It's due to catastrophic battlefield losses. They have to offer these increasingly attractive financial incentives just to get bodies to the front.
So things like huge enlistment bonuses, higher salaries.
Massive bonuses, salaries the civilian sector can't compete with, and, substantial compensation for wounded soldiers or for the families of the killed. These are mandatory if they want to keep replenishing the ranks.
So the financial cost is a direct, you could almost say a one-to-one indicator of the human toll.
Exactly. The more they spend, the more men they're losing. And if this pace continues, personnel costs are projected to exceed 4 trillion rubles by the end of the year.
$51 billion.
And get this, that single line item would account for roughly 9.5% of all planned federal spending for 2025.
Wow. And they're getting people to sign up.
They are. About 200,000 new military contracts were signed in just the first half of 2025. Analysts are calling it an effective commercial contract for war. You pay people enough, they sign up.
But the Kremlin keeps pushing this narrative that the economy is resilient. We saw those GDP growth estimates, right? Something like 3% for Q3 2024.
Right, and that is the essential sleight of hand. That 3% growth is absolutely not a sign of a healthy economy.
It's an illusion.
It's the result of the state just pumping its own money directly into the war machine. Fiscal support was a massive 11% of GDP between 2022 and 2024.
And all that money goes straight into
or related sectors. Manufacturing metals, electronics for weapons, transport equipment, and of course, public administration and defense.
So if you're building tanks, business is good, but for the average Russian consumer.
Well, that's what analysts are calling the cannibalization of consumer welfare. The government is pulling labor and capital away from making, cars or appliances and just redirecting it all.
So for the average person, that means higher prices, fewer choices.
Right. Exactly. All while sanctions are quietly restricting access to technology and cutting export revenues. We're talking an estimated loss of $75 million a day on crude exports alone.
And it all comes back to the human toll. The numbers are just devastating.
They are. Western intelligence estimates total casualties since the start, somewhere between 900,000 and 1.3 million.
Which includes up to 350,000 deaths or permanent injuries.
And that devastating figure is what requires 9.5% of the federal budget to try and replace. It leads us directly to the next major crack in the regime.
The one appearing within what should be the most loyal part of Russian society, military families. This brings us to the grassroots movement, Put Domoy,
or the way home.
Right, and this is arguably the most critical domestic development because it's led by women.
And that's significant. We have to remember Russia has a history of successful anti-war movements driven by women, like the Committee of Soldiers' Mothers during the First Chechen War. The Kremlin knows this precedent very, very well.
These women, they are the wives and mothers of the 300,000 men who were mobilized back in September 2022.
And their demands started out pretty simple. Total demobilization, or at least a rotation. They were saying civilians shouldn't be doing the fighting.
One of the leaders, Maria Andreeva, framed it as not being against the military, but against this open-ended conscription. She said, "Let the army fight, but leave our men alone."
Which creates a huge dilemma for the Kremlin, right? These women aren't the usual liberal opposition. They come from Putin's core base of support.
From outside the big cities.
Exactly. So if you start jailing them, you risk a much bigger public backlash from the very people who keep you in power.
So instead of a crackdown, they just ignore them.
Pretty much. Ignore their pleas, reject rally permits, and stage these, transparently fake political shows like that orchestrated meeting Putin had with hand-picked mothers.
But ignoring them has only made it worse.
Oh, absolutely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The movement's language has completely changed over time.
It's hardened a lot. Initially, their manifesto said they did not oppose the war. They were just focused on getting their husbands back. Now the betrayal they feel is totally public. Recent letters from the group say things like, "They are being betrayed and destroyed by our own."
And they went after Putin directly, didn't they?
They did. After he didn't mention demobilization in his year-end address, they publicly called him theatrically mean and cowardly.
Wow. That really highlights the deep inequality of this war's burden. There's that one quote from a member that really sticks with you.
I know the one you mean.
"Everyone is out shopping for presents and eating caviar while we live in hell worrying about our husbands."
It's not just about troop rotation anymore. It's about this deep, resentful split in society.
Which creates a paradox for the regime. They can't do another mass mobilization without sparking more unrest.
But without one, they can't offer the rotations needed to quiet down these military wives. They're stuck.
So, to understand this fracture on a bigger scale, let's turn to this analysis of VK, the Russian social media platform.
Right. This study looked at the users with really strong pro-war versus anti-war positions, about a quarter of the population for each group.
And the demographics really paint a picture of Russia's political fault lines. Let's start with the pro-war group.
Okay, so this group, the Heartland segment, they tend to be a bit older, average age of 45. Slightly more women.
And crucially, they're more rural. About 27% live in places with fewer than 100,000 people.
Then you have the anti-war class. Younger, average age around 40, 42. Mostly male, about 64%.
And highly concentrated in the big cities. Over half of them are in Moscow or St. Petersburg.
It's a classic divide. Urban, younger men versus the older, more rural population.
And their values just reinforce that. The anti-war users have a stronger political identity, often liberal, and they prioritize self-development. They're looking outward.
They're more interested in English, in traveling. Meanwhile, the pro-war users often just call their view moderate, which suggests a kind of political apathy.
Which is perfect for propaganda.
Exactly. Their values align with the government's message. Traditional values, orthodoxy, prioritizing family and children. It's the state's social contract in a nutshell.
You would think these two groups would just be in completely separate worlds online.
You would, but the analysis found something much more nuanced. Something really compelling, actually.
Which is?
The information overlap. Despite being so polarized, both groups share a ton of common interests. History, sports, music, even nostalgia for the USSR.
So the chasm isn't absolute. They're consuming some of the same content.
Right. But the deepest common ground was in their values. When asked what the most important trait in other people was, the top answer for both groups
Let me guess.
was kindness and honesty.
That's a huge takeaway. It suggests the conflict isn't really about a fundamental difference in human decency.
No, it's about political identity and orientation. The propaganda works because it preys on the political apathy of that moderate majority. But if that group starts to feel the pain of the war, like the wives are, that apathy could crumble really fast.
And the data gets predictive. The study found that a machine learning model could predict anti-war status with 90% accuracy just based on what users subscribe to.
Which means the government, theoretically, knows exactly who is dissenting.
Which brings us back to the architect of all this.
Back to Putin. We said this stems from one man's ego, and you can connect all these dots, the financial cost, the domestic strain, directly back to him.
It's very hard, as the sources say, to separate the ego from his absolute rule. This isn't a new policy, it's a long-standing vision to restore Russia's global power.
Reunite ethnic communities, reclaim old territories, and his leadership style is perfectly designed to achieve that, regardless of the cost to his own people.
It's described as a blend of directive, charismatic,
And intensely Machiavellian. He scores very high on what they call the dark triad traits.
narcissism, psychopathy.
And Machiavellianism. These are the traits of someone focused purely on power, manipulating others without empathy.
And yet you can't deny his strategic abilities, his intelligence, his persistence.
Oh, absolutely not. The alliances with China, Turkey, the growing influence in Africa. He's an alert and capable operator. But these are all moves to distract from or just mitigate the insane internal cost of the war he insists on fighting.
The ultimate power dynamic sounds less like a head of state and more like a crime boss.
That is exactly how one researcher put it. A godfather, a thief in law, who manages a rabble of conflicting groups around him. Oligarchs, factions, you name it.
So his presence is what keeps the whole thing from collapsing into infighting.
His absolute authority maintains the order. The analysis suggests that if he were suddenly removed, it could lead to widespread conflict among all those groups fighting for control.
So what does this all mean? The fact that Russia is committing nearly 10% of its federal budget just to pay soldiers, that it's cannibalizing its own economy, it shows a total focus on the current front.
100%.
The conflict is localized in Ukraine not because of any reluctance, but because they simply cannot afford to pick a fight with NATO right now. Their resources are just too focused on this one unsustainable effort.
The whole social contract relies on public apathy. And that apathy is visibly and very publicly starting to fray.
So we've taken a pretty comprehensive deep dive today. We've looked at the critical domestic costs Russia is facing, the unsustainable military budget, the rise of the Put de Moy movement.
A movement that's challenging the regime from within its own base. Plus that social media data showing a public that's highly polarized, but, more complex than you'd think.
And this leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider.
That VK analysis showed that anti-war positions could be predicted with 90% accuracy just based on social media activity. The Kremlin knows, statistically, who opposes this war.
Right. And given that they've chosen to ignore the military wives rather than risk the backlash from arresting them, it raises a really important question.
If the government can already reliably predict who the dissenters are, how much longer can they maintain that passive social contract that keeps the rest of the country just ignoring the mounting cost of this conflict?
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Arya, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry.
Okay, subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.